Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to a discussion between Sir Karl Popper and Sir John Eccles. Sir Karl and Sir John are close friends on a personal and philosophical level. I hope and suppose that just this cooperation between a philosophic and scientific approach of problems will make this discussion an intellectual event of the first order. Sir Karl, one of the dangerous pitfalls in this kind of philosophical debates is the general misunderstanding between the expectations of the public, who is looking after philosophers as old, wise men, wiser in any case than other men, and the theoretical talks of philosophers, who often deny they are wiser, but still have enormous pretensions. What's your opinion about yourself as a philosopher and other philosophers in relation to the expectations of the public?
I do think that we all have our philosophies, and most of our philosophies are not very much worth. That is to say, I do think certainly of myself not as wise, but as the very opposite of wise. And I think that the main task of philosophy is to examine critically the various philosophies which various people hold uncritically.
And what's your opinion about philosophers, Sir John?
Well, I suppose I should start off also at the beginning like Sir Karl. I, at the age of 17 or 18 as a medical student, suddenly came up against the problem, what am I? What is the meaning of my existence as I experience it? And I proceeded to read quite a lot about what the philosophers had said and the psychologists, and was profoundly dissatisfied with it. So I decided that they didn't know enough about the brain, and the brain was the essence of all my consciousness and everything that I knew myself to be, my memories and imaginings and so on. So what did I do? I decided that I would learn something myself about it, and I became a neuroscientist and went to Sherrington at Oxford and worked with him, and spent, I thought, in a few years I could know enough about the brain and how it worked, and then I could come back and attack the philosophers on their own grounds, and the psychologists also. And my life has been a matter of progressive postponement of that, because I got so intensely interested and involved in how the brain works. But I have come back to it, and in the last year or so I have had some of my lectures produced as a book, which has come into, that's why I'm here, I suppose, because I did write a book on philosophy. It's personalist philosophy, and it gives you my thoughts now.
Sir Karl, can you explain in a nutshell the meaning of your famous falsifiability criterion in relation with your critical philosophy?
Yes. When I was about 19, so 2 years older than Sir John Eccles, when he had a similar experience, I was struck by the tremendous difference between the attitude of physicists towards physics and the attitude of some psychologists towards psychology. What interested me so much was the following. Einstein, who at that time became very famous because he had predicted a certain effect in eclipses. He had predicted that if you observe the sun during an eclipse, then the stars near the sun become visible, that one knew, and these visible stars would appear to be further removed from each other than they would be at other occasions. Now, Einstein became very famous at this time, and what struck me was that he repeatedly said he made certain predictions and then repeatedly said, if this prediction should turn out wrongly, then my theory is false. Now, try to think of something similar about Freud, who also at that time became very famous. Try to think what possibly could a man do what couldn't be explained by psychoanalysis. Whether he jumps into a sea, into a lake, or whether he throws a child into the lake and jumps after it and takes with life danger the child out. There could be no conceivable action of a person which could not be explained in psychoanalytic terms. But there can be very many things which cannot be explained in Newtonian terms or in Einsteinian terms. If this glass, which contains incidentally apple juice, if this glass would begin to hop just along, and we investigate it and find there's nothing unusual with this glass, then we would have to give up many physical theories, especially Newtonian mechanics, and with it even Einsteinian theory. Einsteinian theory can explain a lot, but this hopping of the glass, it could not explain. As opposed to this, let us say our chairman would begin to hop, then this could be very easily explained in psychoanalytic terms. Here you see the difference between two ways of things which both called themselves science. And I said that what is characteristic of genuine science is that it can be refuted by experience. That is to say that something like this is conceivable, which would refute it. While a science is not genuine, if whatever happens, it is always right. If a so-called science is such that it can explain anything you want, then I said it was a pseudoscience.
Well, but can you demonstrate, Sir Karl, what's the superiority of your falsifiability criterion in relation to the verifiability criterion or principle of the logical positivist of the Vienna Circle?
Yes. It so happens that all this happens in the year 1900. About 1919. I'm wrong. I was not 19 but 17 like you.
Yes.
It happened in the year 1919, and several years later in Vienna, I'm born in Vienna and grew up in Vienna. Several years later in Vienna, there developed a circle of very interesting people. The circle was usually called the Vienna Circle. And this circle, under the influence of a philosopher who since has become very famous, namely Ludwig Wittgenstein, under the influence of this philosopher, this circle did engage itself in a similar problem as I did, but a different problem. There was a certain similarity and a certain difference. Let us start with the difference. The difference was that the circle looked for a criterion of sense. Now, the Vienna Circle said language falls into two parts. One part is nonsense. To this part belongs bibabo, or why. That is nonsense. It's language, but nonsense. And to this part belongs the whole of philosophy. So they said, only science was sense. only science, as opposed to philosophy, was real sense. And the criterion of science was verifiability. That is to say, we could establish the certainty of the scientific proposition. If you can prove something, then it's science, and certain, and you can put it in your pocket. Now you possess something. You possess certainty, and this certainty is sense and science at the same time. So here was one difference. And I didn't say that all philosophy was nonsense, but I said that philosophy was partly non-scientific insofar as it could not be refuted. That part of philosophy which was irrefutable certainly was not scientific. For that reason it wasn't necessarily bad. There can be excellent philosophy which is not refutable. Refutability is not a criterion of sense. So I wasn't against all philosophy, and I wasn't a philosopher of sense and nonsense. The Vienna Circle made the distinction between sense and nonsense. And it so happens, and here is the similarity, it so happens that it said the criterion of sense is also the criterion of scientific character. And both is verifiability. While I said the criterion of scientific character, which is not necessarily the criterion of sense at all, is falsifiability.
Sir John, your encounter with Sir Karl, I believe in New Zealand, has been of a great, perhaps decisive influence on your scientific method and your philosophy of science. Would you explain how your scientific method was before and after your meeting with Sir Karl?
Yes, well, this is a very nice thing to remember on an occasion like this. I had grown up, as I mentioned, in Oxford with Sherrington, and had accepted the ordinary philosophy of science there, namely that you do experiments, you do enough, you publish the results, you go on and do some more, and you have a good mainstream of investigation, and that as a good scientist, you should not be wrong. So I had gone on as a young man fighting for a view of transmission between a nerve fiber and a nerve cell at the synapse or at the nerve muscle junction, believing with others that this was electrical, essentially. The impulse runs down the fibers of the nerve, jumps across with electrical action to the, across the gap, and so goes on. Now, I won't go into all this detail, but Dale and Levy, for example, had put up for simpler and slower things the idea that it was a chemical action, that the impulse went down, there was a secretion of acetylcholine, a special chemical substance, which moved across the gap, acted across the gap, and started the electricity off on the other side. I accepted this chemical thing for slower actions, but not for something as fast as when a nerve impulse runs down and a muscle fiber contracts. It takes only 0.005 of a second to get across the gap. I thought that it couldn't be done with the finesse and speed in biochemistry. Well, I've developed these views with many other people, and I think there was about half the scientific opinion for this electrical and half for the chemical. And we admitted the chemical thing, and Dale and Levy got the Nobel Prize in '36 for it, and I still fought against it. I had still believed that it was electrical, but I was getting more and more concerned that I may have made a terrible error, and that I was, as a scientist, this, of course, you suffer for very much, that you have, as it were, gone wrong and been almost, you might say, a failure in science. Then I met Sir Karl. He came down to Dunedin. He was in Christchurch. And he came down and gave a course of lectures about falsifiability. And he inspired me enormously, because then I realized that the essential thing in science is well, there are two essential things in science. One is to have imagination, to dare, to adventure, to go with ideas beyond what you know, and then to test those ideas in the most rigorous way. You put up your brainchild and you try to shoot it down. And in that way, you advance fantastically in science. He inspired me with this. So I immediately converted my rather vaguely formulated electrical theory into and published it in a quite precise manner and developed another electrical theory for inhibition, and that was published and so on. And there it was now. There was something to refute. And I myself refuted it some years later. In 1951, these clear expressions of what would happen on an electrical story were shot down by our own observations in one night in Dunedin.
I may perhaps interrupt and say that about in 1951 I met in Oxford a very well-known scientist, and I said to him that I was a friend of Eccles, and he said, "Eccles, a very good man, but you know the man must be a bit crazy. He refutes his own theories."
Well, that is right. Well, you know, it's not so bad. You get a reputation. In life, you know, you want a reputation for something, to be known and as distinct from everybody else. I got a great reputation, as you say, for refuting my own theories. And not only refuting them, but I was particularly attacked because I enjoyed refuting them. I mean, that was supposed to be a perversion, of a very bad scientific perversion, to enjoy refuting your own theories. But this is what Karl teaches us, that we have to enjoy it. We should enjoy it, because what we've done is we've discovered something. You put up an idea, if you can shoot it down, then you know that that idea is false, and that you have to move into other ideas, and that is a scientific progress. That's the way science works. Well, I shot too well. I'll tell you in a few moments the story. The electrical story was not all wrong. It was wrong where I had claimed it to be the case. But now many other examples are known, new since that time, of electrical transmission, working in just the way I had described, or nearly so. It wasn't so silly, you see. But, so in the book I wrote, I had to have, 64, I had to have 2 chapters on electrical transmission. It's come back.
But what is really valuable in scientific theory and altogether in science is the thought, the understanding, the theory. It is a myth, a very widely believed myth, that science is mainly, the growth of science in our time is mainly due to the fact that millions and millions and billions of dollars are spent on big machines. What really makes science grow are new ideas, including false ideas. False theories are dangerous only if they are dogmatically believed. If they are investigated critically, then the false theory can be extremely, extremely helpful in finding out some point of the truth. Einstein, when he had developed his general relativity theory of gravitation, he wrote, "This theory cannot be true. It can only be a better approximation to the truth." And he gave reason why it couldn't be true. He himself, Einstein, had not believed that he had really discovered the secret of his own theory. That makes the scientist, the technologist, he has to produce cars. The cars go often wrong, but this is a minor point which has to be overlooked, or another technologist has to be appointed who does make cars which go less often wrong.
Sir Karl, you were just mentioning the notion of truth. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by truth?
Yes, I can. It will be very trivial for most of you. A theory of truth was introduced first as a philosophical theory by Aristotle, and it was condemned by most modern philosophers around 1900 or so. And it was reinstated by a great mathematical philosopher who is at present living in Berkeley in America, Alfred Tarski. And I had the great fortune to be converted by Alfred Tarski in a similar way in which you were converted by me a little earlier. And the theory is so trivial that most of you will be disappointed. It says a statement is true if it corresponds to the facts. So truth for me means correspondence of a statement with the fact. And I do believe that very many of the statements which we hold for truth are true. I also believe that very many statements which we hold for truth are false. And I do not believe that there is a criterion to distinguish with certainty between true statements and false statements. And this is the deepest reason for the fallibility of man. Human fallibility, human mistakes are made because one can sometimes give good reasons for a thing to be true and bad reasons for a thing to be true, but never conclusive reasons for a thing to be true. One cannot generally distinguish between truth and false by a criterion. This does not mean that we shouldn't try to find truth, and it does not mean that we shouldn't get nearer and nearer to the truth. It doesn't even mean that we cannot know that we have got nearer to the truth. We can know we have got nearer to the truth, but it means that we can never know that we have reached the truth. Truth is something we haven't got in our pocket.
Sir John, does your conception of truth fit into the conception of Sir Karl?
I am a neurophysiologist, and there are certain things neurophysiologists and people that work with the brains can say which cannot be contradicted. They, insofar as they go, statements approximating to the truth. At least we know where the problem is. The problem has got to a different level, shall we say. Scientifically, there are certain levels at which you work, and you gradually go to levels beyond levels. Having got a firm base, you then go further. Now, the remarkable thing about what a neurophysiologist says is that all of our knowledge of the world, everything including of our own bodies, comes to us through the senses in the first place. We have memories, of course, and we have a gradually building up ways of interpreting it through our whole lifetime's experience. But everything comes in this way. And how does it come? It comes purely by, as we investigate with physics and chemistry and so on, it comes by wavelengths of different character. It comes by sounds, conjuries, not sounds, by air, waves, pressure waves in the atmosphere. It comes by chemical molecules. It comes by heat, that's another kind of radiation on heat receptors. It comes through touch and so on, and pain from our body. All of these are flowing in all the time. It goes on then, and this is where the problem now is. The problem is not that part up to the visual cortex in the brain, but beyond that, into the whole perceptual story. That's where we know nothing at all. This is where the story it's a problem like Sherrington's problem. How does something that's got into the brain and is only nerve cells firing messages to one another, how does that patterned operation of immense complexity, how does that give us experiences? I have been obsessed by this from, as I said, 17 or 18 years old right through to now, trying to understand the very nature of my existence, and that is why I speak of sensory impressions and perception and action and so on. But more than that, just imagine perception, vision, hearing. Just imagine the appreciation you can have of sound and harmony. Just imagine the memories that you are given, how you can remember so many things. Your whole life is one long texture of memories, and how you can act as you will. And I do believe, you see, that there are real problems. That the problems are that you, first of all, things come in, poured in by your sense organs, and coded information of like a dots like this down millions of fibers, and they come into the tremendous patterned organization of your brain, there to go through the most complex spatio-temporal patterning written in space and time at fantastic speed, unimaginable. And as a result, you have an experience. You see a light, you feel a touch, you hear a sound, or you hear many more things. But somehow or other, what is going on in your brain, and that we understand up to a point, turns into a perception. This is a tremendously important problem beyond any solution, but it is a real problem. And we can even find down now a bit, refine where it happens. Then there's the other side. It's all of that experience, but it's customary to deny it for some strange reason, that free will. By taking thought, I can make the jump like this, you see. Just because I've never done that before, but I practiced it in my mind after Sir Karl showed it. I can do this, or anything silly that you like. By just taking thought, I can make my muscles do this. How does it happen? You must say this is a real problem, the problem of how taking thought, having a wish to do something, makes, in fact, my brain, nerve cells, their change in their performance, so that this comes out from my pyramidal tract down to my muscles to make this happen. We all know we can do that, every one of you. Yet most of you, I suppose, will argue against free will, because A, you believe it's against physics, and B, you think it's against physiology. And the answer is, of course, that this is a silly situation. The fact is that physics and physiology are far too primitive yet to explain this.
Well, Sir John, but you are not only believing in the free will, but also in the immortality of souls and the existence of God. And
well, what do we know of ourselves? We wake up in life as a small baby with earliest memories, and gradually through life our self grows with this string of memories which gives us our unique character and our own personal existence. Everybody else are selves like this. This is the way we came from, we do not what, from some oblivion. We find ourselves existing and then going on through life, and then at the end we know that death and destruction of the brain follow. Does this mean that life is but an episode between two oblivions? Does the problem of ceasing to be require us to face up to the inevitable end? I would say no. This is going beyond the evidence, scientific evidence even. It's one thing to prove something scientifically, but it's another thing to say, can it be falsified on scientific grounds? And I would say this cannot be falsified on scientific grounds, because science has no explanation at all, as yet, of what our conscious self is. It's not just your genetic coding and your inheritance. I can argue that one out. This will not explain the uniqueness of yourself. You are more than that. Evolution does not explain me to myself. It explains my body and explains many things, but it doesn't explain my own conscious uniqueness. You can ask me the question why. And so when it comes to this, coming to be is a mystery, how I came to exist and find myself with this body as a conscious being, and then the body disintegrates. Am I to believe that's the end and no meaning more than that? I don't know. Science cannot refute it, because it has got no explanations of how I come to be, how I am, and how I experience, and therefore it cannot refute the possibility, if you wish it, that there is some more meaning and some other waking up from this oblivion that follows after death. I don't know.
There's first of all the world of physics, in which this thing doesn't jump alone, but made jump by me. I call this world of physics world one, and I call that world of discussion of our thoughts, which makes me now move this in this way, world two. That world two is the world of our mind, discussion and so on. Obviously, this isn't pure physics. This is world one plus world two. Now, there are very many physicists who believe that world one is complete, that world two is a kind of, yes, perhaps existing, but anyway, a parallel world of world one. If I make this glass jump, then it is my brain which makes the glass jump. And my brain belongs really to world one, yes, and not to world two. Now, I don't believe in this story, that is to say, I do not believe in the completeness of physics. I do not believe that physics is a complete system, closed towards other systems, and capable of explaining everything in physical terms, everything that happens. I do believe there is a world one of physics. I do believe that there's a world two of the mind. I do believe that the world two of the mind actually influences the world one and changes the world one. And I even believe, and this I take to be a kind of strong argument for the existence of world one and not especially world two, I believe in a world three. And this world three is the world of the products of the human mind. It is the world of theories, the world of thoughts, the world of pictures, but it is not the world of our feelings when we look at pictures. That belongs to world two. World three is the world of content of thought. To the world three belongs science, knowledge, art, and other things. Now, I want to say, first of all, quite straightforward and simply, that world three very strongly influences world two, and through world two, world one. If you see a new machine, then this machine has been conceived by some world two object as a third world three object. It really was first a plan, a blueprint, but before it became a blueprint even, it was an idea, a thing as such in world three. And our world one is constantly changed by world three, for example, by the world of science, and partly ruined by the world of science, partly improved by the world of science. These are different things. Now, the old problem of determinism versus indeterminism, I regard as the problem of the completeness of world one or not, whether world one is complete or not. And I assert that world one is not complete. And world three plays a very great role in this.
Yes, well, I want to just come in and add something to that. At the present time, I'm engaged in a lot of disputation about what is called reductionism. Can everything, including life and mind, be reduced to physics and chemistry? This is the claim of the people that you said, the physicists who want to put everything in world one, pure materialism. Everything is explained by energy and matter going about all their various known motions. Now, when I'm presented with this story, somebody says everything, including biology and mind, is reducible to physics and chemistry. I always ask, pray tell me, what is physics and chemistry? This startles them quite a lot, because they don't know what to say, and you've got to help them then. Physics and chemistry isn't this kind of matter or any kind of physical experiment or apparatus. This is not it. It isn't even all the books and so on. Not as such. In the end, what it turns out to be It is the thoughts and ideas of physicists and chemists in explaining natural phenomena. If they only accept world one, they have in fact got themselves into a stultifying position. They have described everything as being in the world of physics and chemistry, and the world of physics and chemistry turns out to be the world of ideas and thoughts and theories of physicists and chemists, which is certainly not what they want. And so they are driven into accepting these other worlds as you described. There's no way out.
The incompleteness of world one can be shown with a very beautiful and very simple example. All of you knew the interesting problem of mirrors standing opposite each other. In these mirrors, we see the image of each mirror in the other mirror, and this mirror is reflected against in the first mirror, and this case goes on forever and ever. In principle, there is no end to it. If there is an end to it, it is because the mirrors are not very good. But an ideal mirror goes on forever and ever and is therefore incomplete. Now, my doctrine is that physics and chemistry and science and knowledge never can mirror themselves completely. That leads to a similar infinite, a so-called infinite regress. The real big point is the physical world complete, yes or no? The answer is it cannot be complete. It must necessarily lead to an infinite regress, infinite series of worlds which go further and further and further in the description of the physical world. And for that reason, I am an indeterminist. And this indeterminism is very important for man. Not only that we can now trust our free will feelings, which is very important, but it is very important in another sense. Namely, we all know that we are in our thoughts, in our actions, in our doing, contributing to world three. I see in the third world the object of human activity, the object of human endeavor. I do not see in the third world something like Plato, who thought there was a third world of ideas in themselves, independent of man, always true, never false, and so on. My third world is consisting of problems, difficulties, mistakes, theories, true theories, false theories, everything of that, everything which man produces belongs, in my idea, to the third world.
Yeah. Wow. I will add some more, just to make it concrete for you. A stone axe made by Paleolithic man is in the third world.
Yes.
This is to us a message from Paleolithic man to say that he was able to design and sculpt stone for purposes, and he often made things of great beauty. And as you go through history, the archaeologists now have done tremendous valuable service to us by studying and displaying the whole story of man from primitive times. Unbelievably magnificent things were made so many thousands of years ago. This is the story of man creating. This is the story of how man made the world three, the world of all culture and art and criticism and science and literature, everything that you can imagine worthwhile in life. The whole of civilization and culture is world three, and that is the essence of living.
I agree again, but I agree again to add something. Namely, in my opinion, what is really characteristic of man and of the human third world and of the human product is language, human language. And here again, the most characteristic thing is the moment when man was able to tell a story which wasn't true, and thereby to invent the difference between truth and falsehood. The idea of truth and falsehood, which I think is one of the most important ideals of mankind, is the result of the discovery of the lie, of the falsehood. It is the result of the man who first told the falsehood in order to escape some unpleasant consequences in what he had to tell. Bees have a language too, but bees cannot lie.
So you believe in falsification?
This is partly because I believe in falsification. The discovery of lies or the discovery of falsehood is very important. But the thing I now really want to stress that I believe is human language, which is, strangely enough, the only inherited tool of mankind.
But I want to just come in now. Language is not inherited, only the potentialities.
Of course.
But then the potentialities to carve and to sculpt and to paint are inherited in the same way.
Of course, the potentialities we had. I know that newborn babies do not talk. I also know that we don't all talk the same language. I can't talk one word of Dutch except kan niet verstaan. So I am very well aware that language is not in that sense inherited. It is inherited as a disposition.
Of course.
As an incredibly strong need of man to speak. As we see, for example, from the autobiography of Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf and could not speak and had no means of formulating words until her teacher one day gave her a signal for water. Took her hand, put her hand into water, streaming water, and gave her a certain signal. And here suddenly the idea, this means, this signal, this tapped signal means water. This idea suddenly occurred to Helen Keller and made her to a human being. Before she describes herself as a kind of animal. But the moment of speech makes her a human being. I believe that science, and quite generally the human intellect, evolves by revolutionary steps. That is to say, by the falsification of theories, by the overthrow of theories, by finding that theories are false. And some people think that I am therefore quite inconsistent, since I am not a revolutionary but an evolutionary. I am for reform rather than for social revolution. Now, this apparent inconsistency can be very easily explained. Make your revolutions, but make the revolutions outside, so to speak, yourself. Make them on paper, make them, as I say very often, the amoeba dies with its false theory, but man can survive with his false theory because he can kill the false theory instead of killing the man himself. This is the decisive possibility. We can kill the false theory instead of killing man himself. And that makes evolution possible, while in nature we have evolution which consists in the main of revolutions, of the elimination of species.
No, it's true, but can you give a foundation, an empirical or otherwise foundation for your high belief in rationality?
Do you mean that I believe that all men are rational? Then I say no. I don't think we are rational. If you ask me whether we ought to be rational and ought to try to be as rational as possible, and by rational I mean as self-critical as possible, then I say yes. Very few people are really self-critical. All people ought to be self-critical. That is, in brief, my answer to this question.
Sir John, if you are thinking the poor American Negroes in the slums, do you think that this answer of Sir Karl is quite satisfying to defend them?
I don't know that I want to answer that question. In the first place, how many of you here know about this with your own personal experience? How many of you understand the problem in America today? Imagine what your position might be like in Holland if you had these racial problems with you. I think that the problem requires a great deal more understanding, a great deal more of putting yourself in the position of all peoples. What I will say is that violence is no way out. This is what I deplore. I deplore all violence. I think this angry violence destroys everybody. You get less good in all sides, and that is what I fear in America today.
Well, but let me then put it in a more general way, Sir John. If the people in power is not using your high intellectual and moral standards, what is then your self-defense against this kind of power? Is that the self-defense only of your head without your fists?
I believe in this. I can do nothing politically. I can do quite a lot philosophically if people will only read what I write. I have written a book called Facing Reality, which has just been published. It is hardly yet reviewed in America at all. It's been reviewed in England. It's published in Germany. This is the way I can help. I'm trying to get people to understand what life is, what an individual person is, to see the mystery and wonder of existence of each one individual being. How they come to be, their conditions of life. I want to see everybody with the maximum opportunities for what I call self-fulfillment. We want the refinement and development of this world 3, the world of culture and civilization. If you belong to groups, and there are fringe groups that want to destroy all this and say our society is evil, science is evil, have no more science, technology pollutes, have no more technology, well, go back and live in Stone Age country. I can tell you where to go. Go to the highlands of New Guinea. I have been there. I've seen Stone Age people living. You do not know what it is like to live without culture and all the advantages of civilization. I'm not saying that all is good, but I'm trying to say that we should appreciate it. Now, I would say this, that I think neither the Negroes nor the whites in America want to have forcible desegregation of schools if there were a good alternative. I have a good alternative. The alternative is to make the schools where the minorities go better than the others by giving them better teachers, giving teachers more salary to teach there, giving them better conditions, better opportunities. I would say this rather than some forcing of mixture, but to give opportunities. This is the main thing. That is one way. I want always to tell people that we are not like Skinner would have us. A lot of, there's a book just been written called Beyond Human Dignity and Freedom by this fellow Bruce Skinner, whom I think is one of the really dangerous men today. I hope this goes on the air. He is proposing that in this book he now understands the springs of human action because he has worked on rats and pigeons and conditioned them. He is proposing in this book that he now knows enough that given the complete domination of a country, he could arrange for all the babies when born to be conditioned in special Skinner boxes that the babies would like, and they're conditioned and gradually grow up to do what the leaders of the country want. This is power, you see. This is ruthless power. This is not my way of handling man. Like Sir Karl, I want people, every human being, to be treated as a specially valuable person, with these, like you know yourself to be. And I want to give the new generation hope and meaning in life. I want to tell them that they're not just the offspring of an evolutionary process and that their behavior isn't entirely the result of their conditioning, but that they are immensely mysterious beings, which I think we are. Scientifically, as a brain scientist, I can say that. that how we come to be and how we are what we are is beyond any understanding. And therefore I think every person should be regarded, if you like, as infinitely valuable. And if we could get this across in our handling of social problems, it would transform the problems of the world.
Yes, I feel it is time to conclude, and I would say in brief, freedom is more valuable than happiness, even than happiness. Happiness is very valuable, but freedom is more valuable than happiness. And if I may conclude with another sentence, it is that what we need very urgently as intellectuals and from intellectuals is more intellectual honesty, more intellectual modesty, and more intellectual humility.
That is a good note to finish on. I think if the academics could only be humble for a bit, the general public might start to believe in them again. But so many are arrogant and want power, and power is just as big an evil for academics as it is for everybody else.
Sir Karl, Sir John, I thank you very much for your very inspiring discussion, also on behalf of the audience here and at home. Thank you very much indeed. If there is someone who wants to pose a question.
Yes. I have a question for Sir Karl. Can you hear me? And that is that you are at this moment the greatest opponent of the so-called Frankfurter Schule, the dialectical or critical theory of society. Well, it is certainly too much here to ask you to give in a nutshell why you are an opponent of that whole critical theory. But maybe I can narrow my question down to this and ask you what you think of dialectical thinking and dialectical concepts.
Thank you for this question. The answer is, I knew of this Frankfurter Schule, but I didn't know of its particular great influence. I knew of the people who wrote for it, but I thought it was such nonsense that nobody would take any account of it. Now, my opinion about the Frankfurter School is this. After the breakdown of Hitlerism, people in Germany were anxious for some new sort of leadership, some new sort of philosophy. And unfortunately, they got the Frankfurter School.
Perhaps, Karl, I may add some sentence of your own in Reason or Revolution, in which you speak about these questions for the questioner. You are stating then that a substantial issue between the Frankfurter Schule and you is revolution versus piecemeal reform.
The essential difference is really very simple. The essential difference is speaking simply and clearly so that, if possible, everybody who is interested can understand what you say, or believing that university education consists in learning how to speak in an impressive and ununderstandable way so that people are afterwards having new stuff to talk about. That is the issue. That is the real issue between me and the Frankfurter School.
Well, I suppose everybody remembers the answer about killing ideas and killing people, because the answer implies that any social revolution which you are against, explicitly against, that any social revolution must be violent and must involve killing, whereas, of course, this is not at all necessarily the case. There are many revolutionary social ideals, for instance, well-known anarchist ideals that there shouldn't be any state at all.
One should discuss theories and, so far as possible, foresee the social unintended consequences of one's actions theoretically before one undertakes these actions. The actions are sometimes revolutionary in the sense that they are violent. If you undertake violent actions, then very often the result is not that result which you hoped, but exactly the result which you avoided. In a sense, if you like, I'm an anarchist. I dream of a world without a government. I don't like governments any more than you. I dream of a world without governments, but I know that it is a dream. I know that governments are necessary evils. And the bringing about of a world without government, without violence, I think for theoretical reason, which one can theoretically discuss, impossible.
Part of my question is already answered now on the last part, what you talk to him. But anyway, what I want to ask you is, you say that all the problems can, or most of the problems can be solved just by thinking. On the other hand, you say, no, this isn't possible because there are always people who will destroy this. That's the reason why you should have a government. So, in fact, you think this is the best solution now and will be. Please, can you say something about this?
To whom was this?
Well,
I don't even know to whom the question was directed. I haven't understood one
did I
word.
understand your question? Well, in the sense that you are saying that Sir Karl is in fact defending the status quo, the political status quo.
Yes, as fact that he thinks that is the best thing.
Well, you have to start from the political status quo. I am an anti-Zionist. That is to say, I always was against, before the Jews went to Palestine, I was against the Jews going to Palestine. But now, when there are Jews in Palestine and have done good work there and have brought up their children there and their innocent children live there, I am in favor of letting them go on living in Palestine. I am certainly against any injustice done to the Arabs, and I'm very sad about that so much injustice was done to the Arabs. But I have to accept the status quo, whether I like it or not. This does not mean that the status quo is unalterable. This does not mean that one cannot improve the status quo, but this means that a man who does not accept the status quo as it is just breaks the world to pieces. That is all. You can either dream that you can start again from paradise, can say paradise now, we are all Adam and Eve, and we renounce all that happened since. You can either do that or you accept the world as it is. So if you accuse me that I accept the status quo as it is, then I say I accept the status quo as a starting point. Let us try to improve on it wherever we can. But if you don't accept it, then you have universal war. Nothing short, atomic war, of course.